Hi, I'm Anna, and welcome back to BC Stories. Today's story is about a woman who spent almost 30 years helping everyone around her. And on the surface, she looked like the most generous person alive. But underneath, she was carrying a debt she never owed to a man who couldn't collect it, and a boy who made her a promise and actually came back to pay it. But what he found when he returned, that's the part that changed everything. So, before we get into today's story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever done something kind for someone and then quietly, maybe even without realizing it, started keeping score? Not in a mean way, not even consciously, but just somewhere in the back of your mind, you noticed when they didn't say thank you. You noticed when they forgot. Yeah, me too. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. It's beautiful to see how far these stories go.
It was 5:47 in the morning when Christiana Hargrove's world was handed an expiration date. She was doing what she always did at that hour, standing behind the counter of her small roadside kiosk on the outskirts of Wollongong, New South Wales, prepping food for people who might or might not come. The fryer was sputtering. The roof had a leak she'd been catching in a bucket since last winter. The ocean wind rattled the tin walls like it was trying to get in. And then Derek walked in, her landlord, not there to eat. He didn't say good morning. He just pulled a folded sheet from his jacket, peeled the backing off a piece of tape, and stuck the paper to her counter like he was posting a yard sale sign. Eviction notice. 7 days. The building had been sold. A developer. Everything was coming down. Christiana didn't cry, didn't raise her voice, didn't even put down the spatula. She peeled the notice off the counter, folded it neatly along the creases, and tucked it into her apron, right next to the photograph she'd carried for 28 years. A man's face, smiling, young. Then she turned back to the fryer and kept cooking. Here's what you need to understand about Christiana. She wasn't calm because she was strong. She was calm because she'd already survived the thing that should have killed her. Everything after that? Just weather. 28 years earlier, Christiana was 35 and dying. A rare heart condition, aggressive, fast-moving, the kind that doesn't negotiate. She'd been on the transplant list for over a year. No match. Her body was shutting down in slow motion, and everyone around her was learning how to say goodbye without actually saying it. Except Liam. Liam Beckett, a carpenter, quiet hands, steady eyes, the kind of man who showed love by fixing things, your shelf, your car, your worst day. He'd loved Christiana since they were teenagers, and he sat beside her hospital bed like he was daring the universe to take her while he was still in the room. And then, something happened. Liam was a match. Now, here's where this gets complicated. And I want to be careful with how I tell this part because it matters. What Christiana was told when she woke up, with a new heart beating in her chest, was that Liam had suffered a sudden brain aneurysm, completely unpredictable. He was declared brain dead, called it tragic coincidence. His family called it fate. Christiana called it something she could never say out loud. She believed, and she never stopped believing, that Liam had known, that he'd found a way to leave so she could stay. She couldn't prove it. Nobody confirmed it. But she found a note in his jacket at the hospital. Just one line, in his handwriting. You were always the point of me. She never decided if it was a love note or a goodbye. And she never let herself find out. Because knowing, either way, would have shattered the only framework she had left. So she built a new one. She moved to Wollongong, opened the kiosk, and made a vow she would never marry again. She would never keep anything for herself, because everything she had, including her next heartbeat, belonged to someone who was gone. And so Christiana gave, and gave, and gave. Now, I want to pause here because what Christiana was experiencing has a name. It's called survivor's guilt, and it's more common than people think. Psychologists describe it as this deep, persistent belief that you don't deserve to have survived when someone else didn't. It shows up in accident survivors, war veterans, organ recipients, even people who lost a loved one to illness while they stayed healthy. And here's the tricky part. It doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like extreme generosity. People with survivor's guilt often throw themselves into helping others, not because they're naturally selfless, but because they're trying to earn the life they were given. They set impossible standards for themselves. They refuse rest, refuse comfort, refuse to receive, because receiving feels like stealing from the person who's gone. That was Christiana. Every meal she served, every stranger she helped, it wasn't charity, it was a payment on a debt that didn't exist. And that's the thing about survivor's guilt. The debt never gets smaller, no matter how much you give. 15 years ago, when Christiana was 48, a boy appeared. Samuel Mwangi, 12 years old, Kenyan Australian, Finn in that way that tells you hunger isn't new, it's routine. He was wearing a school uniform that hung off his shoulders like it belonged to someone bigger and luckier, and he walked into the kiosk during a brutal July winter with no money, no coat, and no one coming to look for him. His mother had died 6 months earlier. His father was in immigration detention. He'd been bouncing through foster homes and had run away from the last one because, and this part still sits with me, the foster family locked the fridge at night. Christiana didn't ask questions. She put a plate in front of him. The next morning, he came back. She fed him again, and the next, and the next. For 3 months, Samuel sat at a small back table in that kiosk every morning. Christiana gave him meals, bought him warm clothes, helped him with homework between customers, and eventually, using money she'd been saving to fix her own leaking roof, paid the enrollment fees to get him into a proper school. She never asked for anything, not even a thank you. But the day he left, accepted into a boarding school scholarship program in Melbourne, Samuel stood at that counter with tears running down his face and said, "I'm going to be somebody, Miss Christiana, and when I am, I'm coming back for you, I promise." She smiled. She nodded. She didn't believe him. Not because she doubted his heart, but because she'd learned a long time ago that people leave, hearts stop, and promises dissolve like sugar in rain. He left for Melbourne, and she never heard from him again. Not one call, not one letter, not in 15 years. She added his name to the notebook. The day after the eviction notice, Christiana's closest friend, Bev, a retired nurse with no patience for nonsense, came to help her start packing. While clearing a shelf, a notebook fell. Bev caught it, opened it. Pages and pages, dates, names, amounts. Every single act of generosity Christiana had performed in nearly 3 decades. The meals, the school fees, the rent she'd covered for strangers, the coats she'd bought, the bus tickets, all of it, cataloged. And at the bottom of every page, a running total with 2 words, "Still owed." Bev read in silence for a long time. Then she looked up. "Owed to who, love?" Christiana took the notebook back, didn't answer, but her hand, the one that took it, pressed flat against her chest, against Liam's heart, and Bev understood. 4 days before the eviction deadline, Christiana got a call. A local church needed a caterer for a large weekend event. They offered full payment upfront, enough money to keep Christiana afloat for a few more weeks while she figured out what came next. She said yes, took the deposit, hung up, and sat there in silence because she knew she probably wouldn't have a functioning kitchen by the event date. For 28 years, this woman had built her entire identity around giving, and now, backed into a corner, she did the one thing she'd never done. She took. She gambled with someone else's trust. And the worst part wasn't that she did it, it was how easy it felt. Like something inside her had been waiting for permission to stop being good. That's the thing they don't tell you about living as a saint. The fall doesn't feel like falling. It feels like breathing. 2 days before the deadline, a black SUV parked outside the building. 3 people in suits got out first. Clipboards, blueprints, the kind of confidence that comes with money. Then he stepped out. Tall, polished, a tailored coat, nothing like the shivering boy in the too big uniform. He walked into the kiosk the way people walk into buildings they own, which, as it turned out, he did. Samuel Mwangi, 27, property developer, the anonymous buyer. He stood at the counter. Christiana looked at him and didn't recognize him. He had to say his name. And here's the thing. The reunion wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't warm. There was no embrace, no tears of joy. Samuel was professional, controlled, almost rehearsed. He explained the plans: new commercial plaza, modern retail, all tenants compensated and relocated. He spoke about Christiana's kiosk the way an accountant talks about a line item. She let him finish. Then, quietly, "You said you'd come back for me." And something cracked, just for a second, a flash behind his eyes, the boy still inside the man. "He did," he said, but it didn't feel like a kept promise. It felt like a business acquisition wearing a sentimental mask. Later that evening, Samuel came back alone. No lawyers, no blueprints. He offered her a deal, privately. He'd set her up somewhere new, fully funded, no strings. Christiana refused. Not because she didn't need it, she needed it desperately, but because accepting would mean she mattered to him. And if she mattered, if her kindness had actually worked, then the entire framework of her life fell apart. If people actually remembered, if love actually returned, then maybe the debt wasn't real. Maybe Liam's heart didn't require a lifetime of penance, and she wasn't ready for that. So she told Samuel his promise was a child's words, that she never expected anything back, that she didn't need rescuing. But Samuel didn't leave, and what he said next changed everything. "I came back before." Christiana froze. 5 years after I left, I was 17. I caught a bus back to Wollongong, walked to this kiosk, and I saw you, sitting at the back table with another boy. Same plate, same homework help, same voice. He paused. "And I heard you say to Bev, 'Maybe this one will remember me.'" Silence. "I left," Samuel said, "because I realized I was never Samuel to you. I was just the next one, another deposit into whatever you were trying to repay." And the devastating part? Christiana couldn't deny it. Not completely. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. That night, Christiana sat alone in the dark kiosk. She placed her hand over her heart, over Liam's heart, and for the first time in 28 years, she stopped running from the question. She thought about every meal, every stranger, every name in the notebook. Every time she told herself that one more act of kindness might finally settle the score. And she realized, slowly, painfully, like pulling a splinter that had grown into bone, that Samuel was right. She had turned every person she helped into a substitute for the one person she couldn't save. Samuel was never just Samuel. He was another chance to earn the heartbeat in her chest, another line item in an impossible ledger. Her generosity wasn't generosity. It was a prison sentence she gave herself, and she'd made everyone she loved into unwitting guards. The next morning, Christiana made 2 decisions. First, she went to the church coordinator's home and returned the catering deposit. Every cent. She didn't explain, didn't make excuses. The coordinator was upset. Christiana absorbed it quietly. It was the first honest thing she'd done in years. Not generous, honest. And there's a difference. Then she went to find Samuel. She didn't apologize. She didn't perform remorse. She just told him the truth, all of it. The note from Liam, the guilt, the notebook, the fact that she'd spent 28 years trying to earn a heartbeat that was given freely. And she told her the thing she'd been most afraid to say. You weren't just a name in a notebook, Samuel, but I didn't know how to love anyone without turning it into a repayment, and you deserved better than that. Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he placed a document on the counter, a property deed, the building in Christiana's name. I didn't buy this to displace you, he said. I bought it because it was the only way I knew how to be permanent in your life. Christiana looked at the deed for a long time. Accepting it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, harder than the surgery, harder than the funeral, because accepting a gift, truly accepting it, meant admitting that she was allowed to receive, that she didn't have to earn her next breath, that Liam didn't die so she could spend her life apologizing for living. He died because he loved her, and love doesn't send invoices. She took the notebook from her apron, opened it to the last page, the running total. Still owed. And she crossed it out. Not because the debt was paid, but because there was never a debt. The next morning, she reopened the kiosk. Same time, same routine. But the photograph of Liam wasn't in her apron anymore. It was framed on the wall behind the counter, where she could see it without clutching it. And when the first customer walked in that day, Christiana served them. Not because she owed a dead man, not because she was paying a toll on borrowed time, but because feeding people is who she is. And for the first time in 28 years, that was enough.
So that was the story of Christiana Hargrove. And what really stood out to me, what I keep coming back to, is this. We celebrate generosity all the time. We praise people who give endlessly. But we almost never ask why someone gives. And sometimes the reason matters. Because there's a difference between giving from love and giving from guilt. One fills you up, the other hollows you out. And from the outside, they look exactly the same. I think a lot of us carry invisible ledgers, maybe not for organ transplants, but for the times someone believed in us, sacrificed for us, gave us a chance we're not sure we deserved, and we spend years trying to earn it instead of just living it. Christiana's story is a reminder that some gifts aren't meant to be repaid, they're meant to be lived, fully, without apology. I wanted to share this one because I think we need more stories that ask uncomfortable questions about the things we call virtues. Stories that make us pause and check our own motives, gently but honestly. If this one sat with you for a moment, hit that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. And if you enjoy stories that go deeper than the surface, consider subscribing. I'm Anna, this is BC Stories, and I'll see you in the next one.